It was a hot, sunny day. I was visiting my sister and her husband. My sister had gone to work and her husband was asleep since it was his day off, so I was the one looking after my niece. She was watching one of those cliched, sappy, and unrealistic cartoons, so I was mostly on my phone. "Ice cream!" my niece screamed as she heard the classical chime of an ice cream truck outside. "Can I please go get an ice cream, Aunt Jane?" she asked me excitedly. "Sure," I said, digging through my purse for some cash. "Thank you!" she screamed and ran to go buy some ice cream. I could hear the laughter and excited screams of other children as they all raced to the truck. They began to loudly call out their orders. A few minutes passed and my niece had not returned, so I looked out the window and saw that most of the other kids had left. The ice cream man seemed to be deliberately ignoring my niece and responding to the other customers. He continued till everyone had gone, and he finally turned to answer my niece. I couldn't hear what he said from where I was, but he gestured for her to head towards the back to get her ice cream. That was when I jumped off the couch and ran towards the door. I didn't know the intentions of the man, but there were a lot of creeps around these days. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, just as she was getting to the back of the truck. "Caitlin, stop!" I yelled. She turned to look at me, shocked at the fear and alarm in my voice. The momentary distraction gave me enough time to reach her. As I grabbed her by her dress and pulled her out of the way, the ice cream truck's back door flew open and a man yanked me in like I was made of straw. I screamed as the door slammed shut and the truck began to move. Two men were wearing white aprons in the truck. One was the driver and the other one had been the one that had pulled me into the truck. I struggled to get back onto my feet, but the van swerved and flung me against the side of the truck. "It's best to stay down," the second man in the apron said in a calm voice. He was sitting down at the side of the truck with a bowl of ice cream in his lap. He took off his apron, rolled it into a ball, and threw it into the corner of the room. He wore a gray head warmer over his short brown hair that was sticking out in some places. His face was rough, with a little stubble around his chin. He had dark, cruel eyes and a sharply pointed nose. He wore a big black coat, but I could tell he was skinny. From where I was on the truck floor, I couldn't see much of the driver, but from his back I could tell he had broad shoulders and would most likely be muscular. Certainly more muscular than the other. "Who are you people?" I asked them. "You'll find out soon," he said, smiling. And the driver turned around to snicker. There was something about the smile and snicker that made me shiver, and I didn't realize that I had begun screaming. "Looks like we've got ourselves another screamer, Sean," the driver said, turning from his seat. "Best bust out the tape," he added as he turned to face the road. Yeah, in a minute. You know how I like to hear them scream before the main event. It helps let me know what to expect." Sean, as the driver called him, said this with a disgusting smile and look on his face. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, banging and kicking on the sides of the truck. "Okay, I've had enough. For now," Sean said, as he got up from where he had sat and wiped his face with the back of his hands. He reached into the black duffel bag next to him and brought out a roll of duct tape and a length of rope. When I saw those items, I began to thrash and scream louder, using my legs in a flurry of kicks to keep him at bay. "Shut her up already," the man in the driving seat said impatiently. "I'm on it," he replied. He got close enough for one of my legs to reach him, and a weak kick crashed into the side of his head. "Stay still, bitch," he said. I sent another weak kick at him, and he caught my leg and threw it to the side and quickly slipped in between my legs to prevent me from sending further kicks. I squirmed and struggled, determined not to allow him to tie me up. "Hold still," he said, putting a hand around my neck. I clawed at his face and he smacked me across the mouth, bringing the metallic taste of blood onto my tongue. He unwound the tape and was about to put it around my mouth when my teeth caught his thumb. I bit down hard on the bone and he shouted in pain. He punched me hard in the face and my teeth loosened. Another punch and all the resistance left in me was knocked out. "I'm gonna relish you," he said, as he tied and gagged me while his fingers bled. I lay on the floor, afraid for my life as the drive continued in silence. "Shit," the driver said as he stepped on the gas. "We have a tail," he said, and began to drive recklessly, throwing me against the sides of the van like a rag doll. It continued for a while, and soon I was bruised and battered, but I had hope that someone was coming to my rescue. I hoped my niece had told her father, and he was the one chasing the ice cream truck. "Lost the son of a bitch," the driver said and slowed down, and all hope of being rescued died in me. I cried softly on the floor of the van. Now, there would be plenty of that later. You might want to save some of that salt water," Sean said. The truck finally veered off the road, and the drive suddenly became bumpy as the terrain changed. After a few minutes, the truck came to a stop, and the driver got down and opened the back. "Here we are," Sean said, grabbing hold of my rope and hauling me down off the van. He was way stronger than he looked. We were in a deep forest, and they had stopped in front of a large abandoned house that had been there for so long that the forest was growing in on it. It had plants growing up and around it. If it wasn't for the open entrance, you would have totally missed it. It was perfectly camouflaged with the rest of the forest and looked like a large misshapen tree. They hauled me inside to the farthest room in the house, and I saw that I wasn't the only one they had. The room was large, and against the walls were 2 cages. One of them had a girl in it. She must have been in her 30s, probably. She looked frightened and malnourished. There was a camcorder in the middle of the room, and a green screen covered the wall. They dumped me clumsily on the floor and both left the room. They came back moments later wearing dirty rabbit costumes over their heads and nothing else. They were completely naked. I could tell who was who by their physique. Sean approached me with a knife and sliced through my rope and yanked the duct tape off my mouth. He stepped back and told me to take off my clothes. "What?" I asked, terrified. "Take off your damn clothes or I'll cut them off." He said it again threateningly. The punches and slaps he had given me earlier still hurt my face, and I knew he would see out his threat. I did as he said, and I was left standing in my underwear. I heard them click their tongues under their costumes. They made me stand in front of the camera, and Sean began to approach me. "Stay away from me!" I screamed as he came closer. I could hear the heavy breathing coming from under the costume. It was then that I closed my eyes. My mind had probably submitted to the pain I was about to face. But then, I heard a loud metallic thunk, and the driver crashed onto the camcorder, and they both went down. Sean turned with his knife drawn, and had barely turned when the metal bar caught him across the face. He fell, and the knife sprawled from his hand. The driver had gotten up, and he was struggling with my sister's husband, who had followed me here. He caught the man again with the bar, and I heard a squishing sound as the man's head smashed open. "You son of a bitch," Sean said as he tackled him from the side and began to strangle him. Without thinking, I picked up the knife and stabbed him in the back. He rolled off my sister's husband, and I pulled out the knife and stabbed him in the chest over and over again till he looked like a pincushion. I cried as my sister's husband held me and took me away from the bodies. My niece had told him what had happened, and he had quickly driven out to chase the truck. He had caught up with them, but they had noticed him and began to drive recklessly to shake him off. He decided it was dangerous for me and slowed down and discreetly followed them. We called the police, and the other woman was rescued as well. The cops found a mass grave a few meters away from the house. All the victims had been young women, and they had all been sexually abused and murdered.
I turned to the man in the ice cream truck and collected my ice cream. My friend Paul did the same. The ice cream guy told us to enjoy it before it melts because of how hot it was. We thanked him and waved goodbye to us. What a nice dude. Paul and I walked slowly, talking about our grades and the courses we were taking. We had been friends for about 2 years now. We were both college nerds. Before I met Paul, I went to classes alone and just had a few people to talk to, acquaintances. Paul happened to be just like me, and we clicked immediately. We did our assignments together and studied together. I was really grateful to have met him. I frowned a little as I finished the rest of my ice cream. I really wanted another one. Paul glanced at my empty ham and quickly finished his own before suggesting we go back and get some more. It was hot, he insisted. I happily agreed, and we started walking towards the ice cream truck. It was a cute little thing, the truck. It was painted in several colors of ice cream and looked pretty attractive. By the time we made it out there, we met a line. I decided to queue. After all, we weren't doing anything important, just talking and walking to relieve college stress. I was 22 and I couldn't wait to finish school. I wanted to focus on making robots and hopefully make a groundbreaking invention that would fetch me good money. "It's you two again," the ice cream man said, beaming. "I'm Sean, by the way. Do you want the same flavors?" I requested for a double mint chocolate chip ice cream, while Paul went for lime. "You know, if you come back here by 7, I'm giving out free ice cream, and some gifts too," Sean said, looking at me as he did. I gasped and promised that we would be back there at 7. If I could get a tub of ice cream, it would make reading so much easier, and I wouldn't have to pay. Great. Paul merely shook his head at me and paid for the ice cream. When it was 7, we went back to where the truck was parked, and there was no one else there but Sean. He invited us inside the truck and disappeared inside. He called out and told us to sit down and make ourselves comfortable. Paul started to look worried, and he told me that we should leave. Sean came back, smiled, and held up 2 cups of ice cream in front of us. He said he was testing out new flavors and wanted to get our opinions on it. I knew it. Paul was just being paranoid. We took the cups from him and took a bite. It tasted good, although I couldn't place what flavor the ice cream was. Paul couldn't either. Sean told us to take more. Maybe it would come to us. After the 3rd bite, I started to feel a bit drowsy. I glanced over at Paul to tell him that we should head home, but my movement was sluggish. Paul fell forward and didn't get back up. I tried to reach for him, but it felt like I was wading through a murky river. Last thing I saw before my eyes closed was Sean, smiling down at me. I woke up with a gasp and found out that my hands were tied behind me. I panicked and frantically looked around. It was dark, and I was still in the ice cream truck. Paul? Where was he? I sat up and searched the darkness. His blonde hair shone, and I was able to locate him. He was lying on his side, unconscious. No. I swallowed back my tears. If I could find a way to free my hands. I tested the binds and tried to wiggle free. There. Be a good girl for me. I scrambled away from the voice. It was Sean, and he came from the driver's side. He was still wearing that ridiculous smile as he looked down at me. He told me not to be scared, and fear lodged itself in my throat. How could I not be scared? I glanced over at Paul, and Sean laughed. He told me that my boyfriend wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. My jaw dropped. Was Paul dead? Sean bent down so we were at eye level and stroked my chin, looking at me thoughtfully. He said that my hair was beautiful and grabbed a fistful of it to bring it up to his nose. He inhaled deeply inside. I tried to free myself, and he slapped me. My eyes were watering. I yelled that I had to pee. He had to take me out. He reluctantly agreed, saying he knew I wouldn't leave Paul behind with him, He followed me outside. My head was whirling. I needed to do something to free myself. I asked him to free my hands, but he shook his head and tugged down my jeans himself. My face burned. He looked me over slowly and licked his lips. He told me that he would only give me 2 minutes. I bent down and he walked a few meters away from me. I gritted my teeth and searched the floor for anything I could use as a weapon. Yes, a sharp stone. It was right in front of me. I made sure Sean wasn't looking and waddled around till my hands could grab it. I hid it in my sleeve and called out that I was done. Sean came over and pulled my jeans up, muttering about all the fun we were going to have together. As soon as he got rid of Paul for good. My legs were wobbly, but I managed to keep myself steady. My plan had to succeed. I sat in the chair while Sean started driving again. My eyes on him, I took the stone out of my sleeve and tried to cut through the rope. After what seemed like forever, the rope frayed enough for me to remove my hands. Sean glanced back at me and I froze, hoping he wouldn't get suspicious. He didn't and focused back on his driving. I stood up quietly and went to grab the knife on the counter. I walked over to Sean with quiet steps. He suddenly looked up in the rearview mirror and slammed the brakes, but it was too late. I already threw myself at him and lodged the knife deep in the space between his shoulders and his neck. He slumped forward and I rushed to meet Paul. He was still breathing. It was a good thing I knew how to drive. I dumped Sean's body outside and removed the knife. He was very much dead, and I felt nothing. I just wanted to go home. I drove the stupid truck back, and Paul woke up after about an hour. With a trembling voice, I explained what happened to him, and we both swore we wouldn't tell anyone. Maybe I had killed Sean. No one had to find out what happened. We got to town and left the ice cream truck. I slept over at Paul's place. The events of the night still were playing in my head. I knew it would be. I knew it would be a while before I could get a decent night's sleep.
It was already late. Normally I would have been at home, probably getting ready to go to sleep, but I had volunteered for an extra shift at work. Not that I really liked the job or anything, I just needed the extra money. If things went well, I'd be quitting by the end of the month. The streets were mostly empty at this time, which was good because I didn't really want to be held up by traffic. Most people don't actually take advantage of the free pizza after 30 minutes rule, but some a-holes did. And this particular customer seemed like one. The jerk ordered a pizza from way across town. Normally, it would take about 40 minutes to reach him. I raced through town on my scooter, making turns I wouldn't normally do during the day or during traffic. I still had about 10 minutes left when I was nearing the customer's house and couldn't keep myself from smirking. I wondered, hoping to see the shock on the guy's face when I showed up at his door with 5 minutes to spare. His building was a tall apartment, and I realized I'd have to run all the way to the 9th floor where he lived. The building definitely didn't look like it had elevators, and if it did, they would definitely be out of commission. I parked my scooter by the gate and ran straight into the building. I ran towards the elevator and pressed the button and waited for a few seconds, but nothing happened. Stairs. The night clerk said something from behind the magazine he was reading. Damn, I said, turning around and running up the first stairwell I saw. I ran up, noticing the floor number written boldly on the wall. I kept up my pace and didn't stop till I saw 9 written in bold on the wall. I knocked on the door and caught my breath, with almost 4 minutes to spare. There was no response, so I knocked again, still breathing hard. Just a minute, a calm voice called from the inside. Yes? He asked. Someone ordered pizza? I was already getting irritated. Oh, sorry, he apologized. It still took him nearly 2 minutes before he came to the door. I heard the lock jiggle, and the door swung open for a little bit to reveal a friendly-looking man. He handed me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change. My eyes widened at the tip, and I quickly handed him the pizza. He tried to pass it through the barely open door, but dropped it before it could pass through. His reflexes were fast, and he caught it before it hit the ground, but the door was able to swing open halfway before he also caught it with his leg. The door had opened just enough for me to see the dead body of a blonde lady on the floor of his apartment. The big steak knife he had used to kill her was still in her body, and her lifeless eyes were open and staring blindly. My blood ran cold when I realized what I had just walked into. I immediately shifted my gaze and pretended like I'd not seen it. He looked at my face intently as if he was searching for clues to make him certain I had not seen it. I turned around and was about to head out of the apartment. I wasn't even planning on stopping to call the police until I was safely back at the pizza shop. "Sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that," he apologized from behind. "See what?" I asked, turning, determined to play the role of the ignorant till I was safely away. "I would have let you live." He said it in a voice that genuinely sounded sorry. I knew the farce was up and took off running, screaming for help and banging on the other doors as I ran towards the stairwell. No one heard or bothered to check what was going on. "Get back here, bitch!" He growled through clenched teeth and launched himself at me. He knocked me off the ground, and we both rolled down the concrete step, but he managed to break my fall all the way down. I stood up before him, and he grabbed hold of my ankle. Without thinking, I whipped around and kicked him in the face with my free foot. My foot connected well with his jaw, and his grip loosened, and I continued running down the remaining stairs. "Help!" I shouted as I reached the ground floor, hoping that the night clerk would intervene, but he was nowhere to be seen. I didn't bother checking and ran straight through the door and hopped onto my scooter. The engine came to life on the first try, and I zoomed out of the area. The streets were totally empty now, and I began to regret it. My fear had barely subsided when a pair of headlights illuminated the street, and I caught the roar of an engine. I looked back, dreading what I might see, and saw the man from the apartment gaining on me. He was on a motorcycle, and it was fast approaching. I pushed the scooter to its limits and continued to race down the deserted streets. But my scooter was barely a match for the power of a motorcycle and a bloodthirsty man. I began to make dangerous turns in an attempt to shake him off and put as much distance as possible between us. He managed to keep up, and I turned to see him stretching out a hand to touch me. In his hand, a long knife was gleaming in the streetlights. I didn't really know how much more of it my scooter could take. Soon it would be overheating, and I had to get away before then. I made one last sudden turn and lost control of the scooter and found myself rolling on the road, skinning my arms. I heard a crash behind me and noticed he had fallen off his bike as well. I ignored the burning pain in my arms and face and stood up, running again. I had barely gone a few feet when a force grabbed my jacket and pulled me back. He had caught up with me. I skipped my arms through and allowed the jacket to go free, but he caught one of my arms as it slipped through. I swung around with my free hand and scratched his face. He let go of my other hand, and I swung it also, nails first. I gasped in pain as I felt his knife tear into my hand. I pulled out my hairpin, letting my hair drop, and jabbed him in his side. He grunted and pushed me away from him. I landed on the floor and was blinded by a pair of headlights as a car came barreling through, knocking the man a few feet in the air. He flew a little distance and landed with a sickening sound on the ground. The driver came out of the car and approached me. "Are you okay? I saw him chasing you," he said. "I saw him kill someone, and now he wants to kill me," I said, panting. "My God, you're bleeding," he said, and he brought out his phone and called the police. I only ended up with a few burns and scrapes and a couple of stitches. The man survived and was arrested. He turned out to be an up-and-coming serial killer and would have made me his 8th victim that night. I didn't wait till the end of the month to quit. I stopped working that night and rarely even eat pizza anymore.